Welcome back, guys. Bryce here with Southern California Painter. Today we're going to show you guys how to do some drywall repair. For this particular patch, we're going to be installing the drywall from stud to stud. So you can see in this diagram that this is the framing of your house. This is what it would look like behind your drywall, and you'll get a better idea of what that looks like when we go inside to do the repair. But you'll notice that it mentions center to center. And what that's telling you is that when you go to measure, you're not measuring from the edges of the 2x4s, you would be measuring from the center to the next center. Most house framing should be every 16 inches on center. So let's go take a look at what we got, and it'll make some better sense for you guys, and we'll show you step by step how to do this type of repair.
So really quick, these are some of the tools that you're going to want. They're going to make your life a lot easier. Some of them are a little more necessary than others. If you don't have a leveler, you can use anything that's straight, a scrap piece of 2x4, if you got a ruler at home, anything like that. You don't have a pencil, use a pen, use a marker, you know what I mean? You can use a chalk line to draw your lines if you have a chalk line, but I'm assuming most homeowners don't. Other things that you're gonna want, like a drill. It's gonna be really hard to hand screw with a Phillips screwdriver to sink those screws into the studs behind the drywall. So anything you got will obviously make your life easier. Some things, again, you can kind of do without. But so let's go ahead and get into the video here.
Alright guys, so here's our hole in the drywall, right? This thing is kind of mangled and it's misshapen, so there's not going to be a really great way to patch and tie this in. So what we're going to do is cut it from the stud over to the next stud, and we're going to attach the drywall to those two pieces, because something like this that's not square, it's going to make it hard for you to cut your new piece of drywall and try to patch it in. It's going to be easier with nice one clean square cut. So I'm going to show you how to do that, right? The first thing that we want to do is remove this faceplate. You get a little flathead screwdriver. Everybody's most likely got one at their house. And we want to take this off because this drywall is cut right between here. And what I'm going to do is make a nice square over to that stud and come down all the way down, right? So in this situation, we're going to remove the baseboard. So you want to cut the caulk that's on top, and what that's gonna do is free this baseboard up so that when you remove it, it doesn't rip this paper off with it and the paint off with it, because then you'll have to do more patching down there, right? So we score it real quick and get a pry bar and a hammer, and it should come out fairly easily, you know. I'm replacing it, so I'm not being as nice. You know, you might want to make this more intact if you're removing it nicely. What's up, puppy? If you're removing it nicely, you might want to take better care of that. So the next thing that we want to do, right, is this is about 40 inches, okay? So we need to make a straight line across, right? So a good thing to do would be to get your tape measure, and we'll go right to the bottom of this. So oh geez. After we make our mark, you can get a leveler. You know, you could draw yourself a straight line. And now what we need to do is locate our stud, right? And something like this where it's already cut open, I mean, you can do it multiple ways. You can take a stud finder, you can find the stud. You know where these are. You can measure every 16th on center is typically where a stud is. Or you can literally kind of just put your hand in and feel. So my hand, I'm about right in that range, you know what I mean? So what we're gonna do is start cutting this back until we find the side of the stud so we can remove this cleanly. We also need to take this side out also, and I mean, there's really no super way to do it. You can pull this out most likely. I'm gonna score this first so it doesn't rip off the rest of the drywall here. So a couple tools, right, that we showed you that you guys can use. You have your drywall knife, You can use this almost like a saw. And you can go back and forth. You can use a razor, you know, and you can cut it out. You're probably gonna have to cut it a few times as far as that goes. The drywall knife's gonna be better for something like that. For something like this, where it's on the actual stud, you know, you can't do anything as far as that goes, right? You're hitting the side of wood. You're hitting the side of the you're hitting the side of the stud. This isn't gonna saw through it the way that this is sawing through it, right? So like in a scenario like this is where I would be using my knife, my utility knife. It's gonna cut through it, eventually all the way to the wood. See, and now this piece is pretty much loose and it's ready to come off. You know, it's got a screw or two, it's got a couple nails. So another thing that you can use, you probably won't have it if you're a homeowner, but you can use a multi-tool, right? So you take your multi-tool, and you can use this multi-tool also to cut through it instead of the drywall saw. So this makes pretty clean work of it also, right? So I want to cut over to basically where the stud is, and then we're going to try to cut in the center of that stud because we still want to leave this piece of drywall attached to the center of the stud, right? So if you're using your handsaw, eventually you're going to get to a part where you're stuck, you're stopped, you know what I mean? You're going to get to a point where this won't cut over anymore. Here's our stud. That's the edge of our stud. So as far as this goes, right, we can cut down this now and then rip this whole piece off, right? Because if you pull too hard here, you might rip off some more of the rest of this drywall, right? So if this is our edge, we can start towards the left part and follow it down, right? So another thing that you might want to do too, right, is something that I didn't really do because I'm just trying to show you for video's sake, right? So you can take your level, you can guess where you think your middle of your stud is, and we're gonna draw a line. Right, so now we have a decent idea, a decent line to like follow down. And you should be able to just rip this piece right out. That's off. We got this piece over here. We're just kind of ripping off. We have nails, so we want to take the nails out, or you want to hammer them in. But you can't have these nails protruding, or your new drywall is not going to go on and lay flat, right? And then you even have some down here on the baseboard, right, that need to come out. And what we want to do now is measure our piece to fit in here, right? So take a measurement from the top. You know, we got 17 inches. You can take a measurement from the bottom. It's pretty much 17 inches, you know. Right here you can see it's sticking out a little bit, so it's a little shy short of 17 inches, which you can always take a little bit off here and fit your piece in, right? And then you're gonna wanna measure going up as well and get your measurements, right? So another important thing, right, guys, is that you need to know what the size of your drywall is. So if you measure it, right, this is a 1/2 inch piece of drywall. They make 1/2 inches and 5/8, and in some places they might even carry 1/4 inch drywall, but the most common ones you're gonna see and use in your house will be 1/2 inch or 5/8, right? So this is a 1/2 inch piece. So let me explain. If this is flush, you're gonna have less mudding to do on your seam because the two pieces meet up exactly, right? If you were to stick a 5/8 piece in here and it is now sitting above the existing surface, and you don't do anything about that, when you go to mud, you're gonna have to build the mud right out farther to build it up to the 5/8 drywall. So rather than just mudding this seam only, now you have to widen how far, because you need to build up to it. Some instances, you know, you might be doing 2-3 coats to build up to it. And then the reverse would be if this drywall is 5/8 and you're sticking 1/2 inch in here, so now this is sunk, right? It's gonna be sunk below the existing drywall line. So now you have to build the inside of this whole square you got. You have to build that up and out to match this existing. So again, rather than just taping and mudding this seam only, because that's all that you need, right? When they're flush, all you gotta do is tape and mud the seam, and it's gonna look like a nice clean repair that's invisible that you're not gonna see. That's why it's really important, honestly, to make sure that you get the right size drywall. If you get 1/2 inch drywall and this is 5/8, you can use shims behind it to bring that level of drywall out. But if you have the opportunity to measure first, it's gonna be a lot easier for you to get the correct size drywall that you need. So let's go cut a piece of drywall. We'll bring it back in here and I'll show you guys what we're doing next. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you guys how to cut the drywall. I'm gonna use this scrap piece instead of having to bring the bigger piece in here, but it's gonna be done exactly the same and you're gonna get the point, right? So like, let's just say that you're doing a straight line for now, right? So you would go take your marker, make your line, and then what you wanna do is lightly score it first with your utility knife, right? So don't press too hard. And what you want to do is create this channel so that once you go back again and recut it, you will have something to follow in, right? So now that we have this scored, now you can use force and press down to cut it. So if you're cutting a straight piece like this, let me show you a trick, right? If you score it, you can actually just snap it like that, and then you can just cut it out. And there's your piece of drywall, right? So if you're making a straight cut, you don't even have to physically cut it all the way through. You can actually just kind of snap it back like that, and then you can proceed to cut it, right? So what you want to do, I'm just going to use a fake measurement, right? We're going to say that this is 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches by, you know, we'll say 10 inches, right? So we make a 10-inch mark and a 10-inch mark. So you get your level. There's your straight line there. You get your level. You know, there's your straight line there. And what you're gonna do is cut this out. Now, this is gonna be harder to cut out and snap like that to cut it because you have an L in it now. So what you need to do, again, score it. You just want to go lightly because you want to have a
template for when you really start to press down on it. And then you would just do the same this way, you know, because you're gonna have to cut it more than once, multiple times, because you have to cut through the drywall. So once you cut one side out all the way through, then once you score this, then you can snap it like I showed you, right? Right, so once you get one side cut, then you can snap it like that. And then you can cut it, and here's your piece, right? So this will work on a bigger scale too, right? I mean, all you're doing is just measuring. You can say, oh, it's gonna take up this whole sheet. Oh, I need a, you know, an 11-inch piece. So we're making our marks, you know, 11 inches, we're making our marks. Take your leveler, get your line across it. You know, you can measure however big a piece that you need. Draw your line, get it there, score it first, do it lightly, get the channel that this is gonna dig into, and then you can proceed to push down in force with pressure until you cut through the drywall. So again, it's a lot easier with a straight cut, straight piece, because you don't have to cut so deep and so hard. Then you can kind of snap it back like I showed you, cut it off, and then it's ready to go. In the instance for the L, like I said, it's a little bit harder. You need to cut through one side first, and then when you go to score it, then you can snap it like that and cut it. So that's pretty much it. There's really not much to it. It's pretty easy to cut the drywall. Really just need a little bit of math. Take your measurements, make sure you're as accurate as you can be, and then cut it out, and then we're ready for the install. So let's go check that out. All right, guys, so we got our piece of drywall cut here, right? In a perfect world, this is gonna fit every single time, right? You cut it, there it is. So we're a little bit off. It's not that big of a deal, right? So I need to take away just a small piece up here. This is gonna slide under these pieces, you know what I mean, of the receptacles here, right? So if you just draw a line, see how much excess is gonna come away. And you can do the same thing right here with this, right? So once you have your pencil marks, you can kind of see where it is that you need to cut it out, right? So most of you, again, are probably gonna have either your utility knife here or your drywall saw. So you can kind of just either saw or razor blade. And we need to cut out, again, enough that's gonna help us get our piece of drywall to fit. So really just shaving it here, right? You can get your drywall. You can check it again. And as you can see now, we're gonna be under this. This will slide up under here, and we should be just about good to the corner, right? So our next piece to tackle is going to be, you know, cutting the side just a little bit. You know, you wanna try to leave the gaps as tight as possible. I mean, you're gonna be filling it with joint tape and mud, but again, you know, you're not trying to fill mud in a gap that's like this thick, you know what I mean? You want as tiny and as tight as we can get it, right? So now we're working on this side, right? Most of you probably gonna have the utility knife, which is fine, but you know, there's no great way. What you're gonna do is end up taking this away right on your pencil mark coming down. Or if you have it, you can use the multi-tool. I'm just gonna use the multi-tool for now because it's faster, just to get you guys the point across. But what you're gonna do is use that razor, right? And just continually, you know, cut it and get it to where you need it to be, right? You can see we're pretty tight here. We're pretty tight. Just gotta take away a little bit more coming down here on the bottom. And again, you can take your utility knife and shake it this way.
Again, as you can see, there's really no like 100% method to it as far as using your razor blade. So, you know, clear some of this out of your space. Let's make sure this thing fits one more time. If she does, we're good to go. Slide her up under our outlets here and get her in nice and snug, right? So this is what I'm talking about as far as the level goes. So, you know, it's a 1/2 inch piece of drywall and a 1/2 inch piece of drywall. So since these are sitting flush, it's gonna make taping and mudding this seam a lot easier. Again, you don't have to build up so much mud. You don't have to drag it and smooth it out so that you don't see a big old hump in the transition, right? And again, you wanna try to leave, you know, your gaps as tight as possible. I mean, there's always gonna be a tiny gap, but you want to leave them as tight as possible, you know what I mean? So try to do a good job on your measuring and your cutting and all of that stuff, you know what I mean? I was kind of rushing it through on my end just for the video's sake, but again, this isn't that far off. And as far as the top goes, right, so you get like your pry bar or something, and if you stick it down at the bottom under it and leave it there, see how much tighter this gap gets, you know? So that's a little trick too, so you can keep your top gap tight. The bottom's not gonna matter so much because the baseboards go in there, right? So you don't really need it to touch the absolute floor, and you really don't want it to touch the absolute floor in all honesty anyway. If something ever happens, pipe leaks, whatever and stuff, the drywall touching the ground, if it gets wet, is gonna soak up that moisture. So it's not bad, honestly, to have a tiny gap at the bottom also anyway, right? So we have a drill, we have screws. These screws are 1 5/8, right? If you don't wanna buy a bunch of different size screws, 1 5/8 is a pretty good common size. It's gonna be able for you to install 5/8 drywall and the 1/2 inch drywall, you know what I mean? So if you don't wanna buy 1 1/4 or 1 inch or 2 inch ones, you know, 1 inch 5/8 is a pretty good, decent size screw that's gonna be able to install most of these drywalls, right? So here's your studs. That's what we're fastening it to. Now the ideal goal for this, right, is that the screw needs to be sunken in enough so that as you're mudding, you don't have a screw that you're going to be hitting and clawing and stuff and dragging in your mud, right? However, you don't want it to break the actual drywall paper, right? That's the trick. Set the depth enough, but not enough that it's actually breaking the paper and pushing through the drywall. That's an incorrect way to do it. Can you do it? Will it hold? Will it last? Is it gonna fall off? No, it's not, but to code, to standard, that's how you're supposed to set those. And it's a little bit trickier if you don't have the bit. They make actual bits where it will stop. The drill bit will end up stopping before you're even allowed to sink it in there and puncture the paper. So, just a little tip and trick for you guys. The ideal goal really is not to puncture that drywall paper, but you need to set the depth of this enough, again, so that as you're taping and mudding and doing your stuff, you don't have these raised out and it's hitting your trowel or your putty knife every single time you're trying to do it, right? So we got a couple screws, right? Here's our stud. Again, just enough. Don't want to break the paper. You can remove your pry bar now that you're set, and if you want, you can set one down to the base stud down here as well. So that's gonna do it. This guy's sound, he's not going anywhere. We're gonna run some joint tape next and some mud, some compound. I'm gonna be using 20-minute mud, which I'll show you guys right now. So this is what we're using right now, guys. We're using 20-minute mud, right? So what does that mean as far as the 20 minutes go? The 20 minutes is not how fast that it sets, it's actually your working time with the product. So you have about 20 minutes of working time. Now the reason that we're using this and not regular pre-mixed joint compound or toppings and stuff like that is because this is gonna dry faster. So if you can get a fan on it, you might be able to texture it, prime it, and paint it all in the same day. Do the repair first thing in the morning, move on to other work at the house if you have to, and come back periodically, sand it, texture it, do your stuff, right? So anyway, this is a powder, right? This is a powder before it gets mixed, and I'll show you what it looks like here once I get some water on it. So this is what this looks like now that it's mixed, right? It's pretty much like butter, right? It's smooth, butter, you can see it. Drywall mud. So we have a couple options as far as joint tape goes. We have mesh tape or you have paper tape. I don't have any paper tape on me at the moment, so we're gonna use this mesh tape. So this has a tacky backing to it, which is a little bit different than the paper tape. I'll do another video on the paper tape, but you actually have to embed that tape in the mud is how it sticks and stays on here. This should hold its own on the wall by itself. Because of the tackiness on it, on the side, right? This is actually protruding a tiny bit. I'm gonna cut that out and that'll get backfilled with some mud. It's not the proper way, but the drywall broke a little bit on me when I was doing it. So it is what it is. So, but you can see that this joint tape is sticking a little bit, right? So we get some mesh. Your ideal goal is about half and half, right? Is your ideal goal. So now that we have our joint tape installed, again, the ideal is about half and half on each side of the wall, right? Your new drywall and your old drywall, existing drywall. Then you can get some mud. Now, remember that the ideal goal is to make this look invisible and seamless, right? So what I like to do myself personally is I like to leave a quick thin layer. This this thin layer is going to dry pretty quick, especially because of this type of 20-minute compound, right? So can you see the joint tape a little bit? Yes, you can. However, again, when the ideal goal for this is to make this completely flat, transitional, and seamless, right? You don't want to build a huge mound here, and typically when you try to cover the joint tape, either one, paper or mesh, in one go, typically to do so you're leaving a little bit of a bulge, a hump, etc., right? When I leave this nice, flat, and tight, even though you can still see some of this joint tape, this will dry pretty quick. I'll run another quick light coat over the top of that, and basically what we're gonna do is 2 coats. And again, if you're, somewhat decent with your mud work, you should be able to leave this pretty tight and flat to begin with. Okay, so it's gonna look something like that, right? We need to get the first pass on it. That's filling in some of this area. and we want to leave it nice and tight, right? Another thing that you need to do, cover your nail holes, right? Leave those tight too. Most of these nail holes are covered by that. And I mean, that one down there, you're not really gonna see because it's gonna be covered by a baseboard. You probably actually won't even see these ones here on the side because they're gonna be covered by the door casing or molding. But the proper thing that you would end up be doing so that you don't see it all also is to mud over those nail holes. So now that this is pretty much taped, mudded, installed, ready to go, I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna let this mud set up, and then I'm gonna come back, do another light pass, like I said, of compound mud over that, and that's what's gonna hide the joint tape again. It'll be ready to sand, ready for texture, and then prime and paint following that. So we'll be back here in a minute. I'll do a second pass of mud. I'll go ahead and just show you it real quick, and then we'll proceed with the rest of it, sanding, texturing, and yeah. Okay guys, so our second pass of mud is dried. You can see it, it's here, it's ready to go, it's ready to sand. If you left your drywall pretty smooth in the mudding, you should have very little sanding to do. What I'm using right now is some 220 grit. You can use 320, you can use 150, but anything really below 150 is gonna get pretty scratchy. You know, if you're starting to use 60 or 80 grit, maybe even 100 grit, depending on if you're hand sanding, machine sanding, you might start even ripping some of the drywall paper here and stuff like that. So I mean, you don't really need anything too crazy. As long as you left your mud work pretty tight, it's gonna be easy to do, right? So let's go ahead and sand this up real quick. We want to get it to a flat, smooth surface first. Once we do that, we can shoot some texture on it and try to match this knockdown texture, right, that's around it. So all you gotta do really is sand the edges. You can see those, you know, the line and everything's out pretty flat. Right, so the most thing that you're gonna see and notice is always gonna be the transition where they meet. You know, you want the middle smooth too, obviously, but you're most likely, when you see the patch and repair, is because you're gonna see the edges of where the actual repair was. So yes, you want the middle smooth too, but your main focus should always be the outside edge where it transitions. So you can see we're pretty smooth. You can feel it. You know, the best way that you can do it, if you're really trying to see, is the feel. Feeling's gonna be a lot more than your eyes are gonna be able to tell you and give away. So you can kind of feel where the hump is, where the bump is, how smooth it is, if there's like what we call snake trails sticking out still. Okay, so we're sanded, we're smooth, we're ready to go. We need to texture it. So when something like this is textured originally, they're coming in with a machine, they have a hopper gun, they're shooting the texture on the wall, and then they're, you know, proceeding with the knockdown where they drag their knife and knock this down. So if you have all that equipment, right, air compressor, etc., that's gonna be your best way to always get the closest match to, you know, something like this. But for small repairs, they make stuff like these in cans. Shake it up like a spray can, spray it on, you know, match the texture obviously as close as you can get it to your capability, and then we're ready for prime and paint, right? So you need to pay attention. This knockdown, right, it's got pretty thick pieces, you know what I mean? It's fairly heavy, fairly thick, fairly big pieces, right? So that's what we are aiming for. Okay, so with our can, right, we can adjust the setting actually from heavy to light. You know, I don't know how well you can see that, but this black knob right here, it actually says heavy right on top of it. And if you were to rotate this, you can get it to where it says fine, and you can make the spray pattern a little bit lighter, right? Remove this white thing, don't need it. You know, better to let some out first. And what we have to do, right, is we want to build it up fairly heavy in some spots because we want to make big chunks, right? And the best thing to do is to texture a little outside your zone. You texture a little farther away, right, to kind of hope to make it all blend, you know what I mean? And another quick thing, now that I'm heading towards it and I see it, right, get some tape, mask off your outlets. That way you don't get texture on your outlets. I have a cardboard shield, we use it for painting. I'm sticking this right here so I don't get texture flying out. If you don't have that, you can put some plastic up there. Sometimes these cans act up. Personally, I buy 2 cans. For something like this, I'd buy 2 cans just in case one can didn't work, and then I'd return it so I don't have to drive back. See, so this can already right now is acting up, right? Acting up, giving us a hard time. That's why I would buy more than 1 can. For that right there. Not doing what I needed to do. You can try to play around with it, maybe try to change it to fine. See, I'm getting a little more out here. And then what we're gonna do is let this set up. We're gonna let this set up for however long this thing says. 4 to 8 minutes is what this can is recommending. So we're gonna allow this to dry for 4 to 8 minutes. I'm gonna check my watch here. But in the meantime, some helpful stuff for you to have, acknowledge, and use, right? Have a damp rag. It's always better when you trowel to have a wet blade. You know, I mean, not soaking wet, but damp, a little bit wet. And another reason that you would carry this rag, right? I'll show you as we're doing it, but when I go to trowel, it's gonna get some on this blade. And if you go to trowel and wipe again without wiping it off, you're gonna drag that through here and you're gonna kind of mess with the texture, right? Which is also why you need a clean blade that doesn't have stuff like that, right? Chunks from your previous stuff. If you have this up on here and you're troweling like this, you're gonna leave claw marks, right? It's gonna be clawed and mangled throughout the texture, and it won't be consistent and it won't look good, right? So we're letting this set up and dry a little bit. I have some heavier chunks because this is some heavier texture, and as you can see, if it shows well enough, this is already kind of laying flat and sinking in because this is a water-based product, so it's starting to flatten out right now, you know what I mean? Which is why I tried to shoot some bigger chunks on here. So when you're doing this, all you're really gonna do is take your knife, be as gentle and as little pressure as possible. And we're gonna start troweling. Here's our stuff. wipe it off, right? We don't want it. You can trowel from any direction. And it's honestly better to go in more than one direction, because it's gonna help flatten out the other sections that going in one direction isn't. It's always good to move your knife around and go in more than one direction. And again, I'm not even really pressing on this yet until I want to or apply pressure. I'm really just kind of holding this in my hand and just letting it just kind of slide and glide down the wall. I'm not really applying any pressure at the moment unless I want to or unless I need to, you know, if I'm trying to flatten out another spot more. And once you're done, you know, once you're done, if you really need to or want to, you can add a little bit more here and there, and you can sand off a bit if you need to, you know, like if you need to sand a little bit of this out, you can, right? And then you can shoot a little bit more texture on it if need be. So the cool thing with like texture is once this dries and it sets up is that, like, again, you can really do whatever you need to do to it, right? To manipulate it, sand some of this off, shoot a little more on it, and just kind of play around with it, right? Until you really get what you need from it. So this is looking all right. I'd like it to have a few more chunks in some of these like little spots, but it's gonna work, it's gonna pass, it's gonna do its job that it's needed to do. You know, anytime that you're texturing, it's always gonna be slightly different, right? Because every person who does it has their own technique, their own way, their own style. So really all we're trying to get is as close as we can so that you don't see the physical repair, right? So, and we even have a little bit of trash right here, right? It drug through this. And again, this is all stuff you can just sand a little bit of it off of later, right? You can sand a little bit off. Okay guys, so our texture's done, it's set, it's ready to go. A good thing to do prior to painting it is to give it a light sand. That'll get rid of a couple lines and any big chunks or anything that we don't want in there. So it's just a light one, right? You know, you can sand a little more in an area that you want or need to, but just a little light guy, it's gonna knock off any boogers or anything else, right? So I have some blue primer here actually from another job that we did, and this blue will be a nice bottom coat to this teal paint that we're gonna be painting with the finish, right? So here it is. Here's our, you know, drywall repair. It's got this knockdown on it that matches the existing texture of the wall. And that's pretty much all it takes in a nutshell, right? It's really not too hard, guys. It's probably a little bit more math than anything, right? Measuring, cutting, and just kind of taking your time and doing the repair and making sure that you are leaving your seams and your mudding and everything tight
will make it easier for you as far as the sanding process goes and everything like that. So now you know how to repair some drywall if you have to, from stud to stud. And once this is done, we will paint it with the finish coat. But as you can see, it blends pretty good as far as tying into the rest of the wall here.